Well, welcome everyone for attending our July Lunch and Learn. My name is Marissa Howard. I'm the Programs and Membership Coordinator for the DeKalb History Center. For 71 years, we have provided free access to research, exhibits, and programs such as this one, our Lunch and Learn series. We are a member-supported organization that needs your generous contributions to continue these programs. If you enjoy this program or others we've offered, please consider joining our community by becoming a member. And I also have to do a little brag. Our Silk and Stitch exhibit downstairs is now open. I encourage you to check it out. It's beautiful. And like all of our exhibits, they're all free. So check it out directly downstairs. Linton Hopkins came to Eastlake in 1989 and began writing down stories he heard from Tommy Barnes and Charlie Yates. 4 years later, when he told Tom Cousins he wanted to publish them with some history of the place, Tom said, "If you write it, I'll sell it." The book sold out, and this is its sequel. Linton is a retired neurologist, and many of his patients came to see him in wheelchairs. Like Bobby Jones, they inspired him with the nobility of spirit. He lives in Atlanta with Priscilla, his wife of 56 years. They have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. And now, my friend, Linton Hopkins.
Thank you. I'm reminded of something Bobby Jones did on this hot day in 1930. So I'm grateful that you came out on a hot day. When Bobby Jones won the 1930 U.S. Open in Minnesota, it was 115 degrees. He had to have his bow tie cut off. And he won it with a birdie putt 40 feet uphill, double breaking. He said later he could hardly see the flag. He was so blurred and exhausted. The putt went in, people went nuts. And another person missed his chance, and Bobby won. He went in, and when he came out, Mark Frost said, he'd been in about 15 minutes. He said when he walked out to the crowd, which was huge, he said it looked like his hair had been parted by a laser. He had on brand new +4 sparkling shoes, beautiful outfit, top to bottom. And he looked relaxed. The man who was presenting him the trophy was shaking and nervous, and Bobby was totally relaxed. He grabbed the microphone, or was given the microphone. He said, "I only want to say 2 things. First, thank you for coming out on such a hot day," which connects to all of you. We know how hot it was for us. And you know how hot it was for you. Thank you. Second, I'm very lucky to win this tournament. So-and-so over there should have won it. So, in a way, I don't really deserve this trophy. But I thank you all, especially Mr. Bush, I think, was George Bush's grandfather, for giving me the trophy. And that's all I have to say, so once again, thank you very much. And that was it. And that was the first live radio broadcast from the course of any golf tournament, any sporting event. And although my father never told me that he listened to it, he worked for the Atlanta Journal in 1930. And I know he did, because when he got a chance to tell me his favorite Bobby Jones story in about 1950, he said, for all of us who worked interviewing people, Bobby Jones was the quintessential best interview ever. He won something. Instead of going on about how great he was, yeah, I'm great, that was really a great punch I threw, a great cut I made. He always managed to deflect the spotlight, turn it on something else. Just want to say thanks to Joe here, who was such a help carrying my bag, or anything that got him out of the picture. And of course that made people love him more. It was an astounding love affair, really, between the people in Gaul and out of Gaul who saw him. That's true of the other major character here too, Alexa. I'll introduce her in more detail. I also want to say that this current book is the child of this. This is the mother book, and it was written and published first in 1996. I had no business at all doing it. So when Tom told me he would sell it, and when I saw or heard from his minister, Wayne Smith, what was going to happen to East Lake, I scrambled and turned stories into a little book. And was glad to have it. Weirdly, it was shot on film. Microsoft Word did not exist. So when I get time to write a new book, I just couldn't reissue this one. And then a man named Fraser Durrett, who was a lawyer with Jones. I knew his son, mostly a friend of my son's. Fraser said, "Please take my story on Bob. I can't do anything with it. I want you to have it." I said, "Well, thank you, Fraser." And then a man that I played one round with, Harry McCusker, he wrote a mystery story, which is now chapter 12 in this book. He said, "I've tried to get it published. It's too long for a magazine, too short for a book, but you take it." And since it was the best mystery story I ever read, I still recommend it that way. I said, "Sure." So that was in the first book. I had to rework it because the whole all changed. But I created this second book because of all the people who came up to me. If you want to get stuff on something, any subject, write a little book. Because anybody who reads it, not many people did. It's not a John Grisham bestseller. But people will find you when they have a story. I've heard 2 people today come up with stories. I don't know, something about the gravity of writing a book that really makes people attractive. This story really starts with Tom up here on the slide. Not just because he said he was going to do it, but because of what he did. I hope some of you will come up tomorrow and see what he did. It's just hard to believe. You can talk about it, but you have to see it to believe it. School up here looks like Dulles Airport. This one looks like Dulles Airport, and it has 1,000 students. People are scrambling, families are scrambling to move into the school district that will allow their children to get into the Drew School. It's leading everything in Atlanta. The crime rate is down. Tom Cousins likes to say that, he says that the crime rate in East Lake is less than in Brookhaven. And a friend in the audience said, well, there's a lot less to steal at East Lake than there is at Brookhaven. But nonetheless, it's a safe place now. And children are safe there, which was his main motivation. So thanks to Tom right at the beginning. The golf course, this picture was taken out of an airplane going to California to a neurology meeting, believe it or not. And I had a brand new Olympus film camera. And there it was right in front of me. And I grabbed a picture, and it showed the housing project. Here is a school in the housing project with no windows. Children were not encouraged to pay attention to what was going on outside because it was violent. And here, up there, is a little high-rise building. That's the only building that's still there. That was for disabled patients. I had a patient there with myasthenia, which I specialized in. He had trouble walking and speaking. And he said, Doc, You and your neighborhood have clout. We don't have any clout. We see the police come and they break up all the drug deals, and then they go away and all the drug deals come right back, and the violence. And we call them and they don't come until they're ready to get a little army together, and then they come. It was called East Lake Meadows, which sounds wonderful, and it was, in its day, a solution to the housing crisis. Techwood Homes came along at the same time, and of course it's been remade, but Tom's redoing of this place is what allowed this tournament and this golf course to thrive. I want you to focus here. That's the clubhouse, and there's a little patch of dirt between the clubhouse and the lake. And I want you to pay attention to this, because September sunrise and the equinox, East Lake in Atlanta is such, it's probably this building too. If it faces east-west, then you can bet lots of money with your friends. Come with me at the spring and the fall equinox, and I will show you the sun rising in the center of the property and setting in the center of the property. And they're always amazed. Tom Cousins told me that he never heard that something East Lake was sort of a Stonehenge. But it is true. If you're out there when the sun set, you can see it setting on the southern corner in the winter and setting on the northern corner in June. But in March and September, it's right there. So Dave Samson, a friend hired by the club to go out and take pictures, scrambled up about 4 in the morning and got out there on the 18th hole. You'll see the 18th hole again, and took this picture. The reason I wanted you to focus on that little piece of dirt is because that's where I met Tom Cousins. He was walking out in the construction. For some reason, he let me out on the construction site as one of the members to take pictures. And I ran into him coming out with Walter Ashmore. Shook his hand and asked me if I could take his picture. And I got him in a really happy moment. He was looking at it, he liked it. He looked back at the clubhouse, he liked that. He was with Walter, who was his project manager, who built the Bank of America building at North Avenue. After I got to know Walter, some of you remember him, I said, Walter, how do you build a 1,000-foot building? He said, well, you got to get the first floor real flat. There are also pictures of these craftsmen that came in and created William Schutsey, plaster masterpieces. So East Lake is a masterpiece. Some of you, all golfers know, but some don't, and I left this slide out earlier. The reason Bobby Jones will always be remembered in sports history is he did something that no one will ever do again. I can say that, you can say that with absolute authority. 4 of the top championships in 1 year. Others have come close. Tiger Woods owned the title, but didn't have them in the same year. So the reason it'll never happen again is Bobby Jones was an amateur. He won the US Open, beat the professionals. He won the British Open, beat the professionals. And they were scared of him. He looked so gentle on the tee, so kind and sweet. When he shook their hands, they all thought, oh, I'm going to beat this guy. But they didn't. Here, they're arranged in the order in which they came. He first won the British Amateur, and then the British Open, and then the US Open, which I talked about, and then finally the US Amateur at Marion Country Club in September. The press went nuts. Everybody went nuts. They gave him a second ticker tape parade, not on winning the Grand Slam, but a couple of years before when he won the British Open and the British Amateur. He's the king of the story. They used to call him Emperor Jones. But Alexa, I'm on a mission about Alexa. Nobody knows Alexa. Everybody knows Alexa's name now because of the funny personal assistant where you say Alexa, and say, I'm now playing Frank Sinatra or something like that. But Alexa Stirling, I love that name too. It's not spelled like the silver. It's with an I. And so if you're trying to convert people to Alexa, you have to make sure they know how to spell it. S-T-I-R. She is Sterling with an E too, because she grew up, born in Atlanta on Piedmont Avenue. Her father and mother came here from England. I've got a picture of them, and I'll tell you more about them. But in this picture, Bobby has just won his U.S. Open. He's 21. His older friend is 25, getting ready to turn 26. They're exactly 4.5 years apart. Now, I don't know how many of you have an older sister, but I have an older sister. And if you have an older friend who happens to be female, and you live very close to her, as they did, you're a little intimidated. They're in a different universe. My 2-year-old sister, when her friends were sitting there, and I came in the room doing my goofy things, trying to show off, they went, trying to leave. And that's the way all older sisters are. And all younger brothers, I think, try to show off to their older sister and make fools of themselves. It's just part of the pedigree, I think. Bobby Jones is also a sports person who had 2 postage stamps named for him, which was a great honor. And the first one on the left, I think in the 1960s, the slide cut off, I'll read it right here. The slide cut off, it was in 1981 and 1999. His grandson and granddaughter are here. That's Bob Forth right there, and Ann Larry's granddaughter. That's Sidney Matthew on the left, who did a lot to help me with this book. And I'm grateful to him, just like I am to Tom. Now, Mr. George Adair there is having what we call a bad bow tie day. He got up, he tied his tie in a hurry, didn't look in a mirror, and then went to work. George Adair is an icon in Atlanta, as you must know, and was a first mentor to Bobby Jones. Bobby Jones was about 12 or 13 in this picture, nice bow tie. And his friend is Perry Adair, George's son. Those two, with Alexa, just played every day. They grew up right there. Their fathers and mothers loved to play golf. They saw the parents laughing, goofing off, goofing up, and they went out with them, trailed behind them. That's the best way to learn golf. Father and son, their closeness is probably responsible for Bobby's success. Mr. Jones was denied by his father the chance to play baseball for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He practiced law. He had to give up on his sports career. So he was a tremendous supporter of his son and went to all the tournaments, just loved it. But Bobby didn't make any money, so there really was a financial burden on the family and on the son. He had to go to school at Tech, and went to Harvard. During the same years that he won all the tournaments, he got his law degree and won his first case. The year before the Grand Slam, he won his first law case. Bobby Jones was amazing. Finally, here he is in 1923, the same time as the picture before. And here he is when he won the state amateur, I think 14. It was amazing that he did that. He was a hothead then, throwing clubs. Very difficult for Alexa and even Perry to play with him when he hit a bad shot. He was such a perfectionist, and usually the youngest kid playing, 2 years younger than Perry. But when he finally won it, this is a happy picture because he finally won it. He had 7 years when he couldn't win anything, and now he'd hit the big time with the U.S. Open in New York, of all places. This was a couple of years later when he wrote a book with O.B. Keeler in 1927. He was 25 years old, and this painting appeared later based on a photograph that O.B. called The Concentration of Championship, which has been widely circulated. It hung at John Jarrell clothing store in Atlanta for many years. Although it's cut off here, this is Bobby Jones's favorite picture of himself in 1927 after winning the amateur. Exhausted and happy. I like pictures that show him happy because he was not generally a happy person. He fought hard to control himself, and he had a temper, which he never lost. And it just rose up into him, it exploded. His friends were a little scared of his emotional state when he was that way. And it did ruin his golf game. He never won a big tournament. Alexa fussed at him about it and encouraged him, told him not to waste his God-given talent. And he said in a book 60 years later, not 60 years, but in 1960, Golf Is My Game. He said, in 1918, I was with these other friends of ours on a tour to World War I. And Alexa was the star. She was the U.S. women's amateur champion, and I just won the state amateur. And I pitched a fit at Brayburn Country Club in Boston. And everybody was horrified. The press ate me up. Alexa almost died of embarrassment. And I decided right then I was going to bring this to a halt and control my behavior. And then he did a great writer's series of equivocations. He said, it didn't happen right away, but eventually I stopped doing it, at least in tournaments. So he knew he had that problem. It was just part of him, but he did control it. To me, that's the first great victory of his life. The second great victory of his life was how he treated his paralysis later, and I'll get back to that. Here's a picture that shows how difficult it must have been to hit a ball with a wooden club. He and Alexa all played with wooden clubs, and they were so flexible that if you hit with one, you can see your ball will go almost anywhere. It's very hard to aim and have it come off. The Coca-Cola Company was happy to give me this picture. The pictures that you see of Bobby Jones with his father, Colonel Jones, also Robert Jones, show them happy. The colonel is usually talking, and his son is looking at him with an expression that says, "You're just great." But I've heard this story 20 times, but I still enjoy it. They got along famously and had a huge benefit, as I said, to his career. The other picture top left is with Watts Gun in 1925 when they met in the final of the U.S. Amateur. Two members of the same club. Never happened before or since. And Watts on the first tee said, "Are you going to give me my usual 4 shots?" And Bobby looked him right in the eye and said, "I'm going to give you hell today." And he did. But it was a struggle because Watts was electrifying. It was at Oakmont. And he really thrilled the gallery. The other picture is with Mr. Woodruff. Now, Mr. Woodruff was so terrifying to people in Atlanta, as you well know, and probably know, that nobody would roast him on his 80th birthday. Everybody refused, except for Bobby Jones. They became very close. And I think partially because of their isolation they felt from being who they were, and also my theory is that they both had this temper problem. I'm not sure about that, but that's what I'm putting out there. They were attracted not just by the great fame that they both had, but the sympathy for the troubles that it brought. Anyway, they loved being with each other. And when Mr. Woodruff rose at the end of the roast to say a few words, Bobby Jones said, "You can't stand up. This is all for all of us to talk about you. Sit back down." People just went, and he sat down. Later, he said, "Bob, I wish you'd let me talk. I was just going to thank my mother." So, he listened when Bob spoke. Alexa Stirling was a huge part of this book. I wrote a little about Bobby in the first book, but I never saw him, I never met him, so I leaned heavily on those who did. My job in the book was to bring their voices out. And when I counted it up at the end, I'm responsible for about 30% of the words in the book. Charlie Yates, Tommy Barnes, Tom Cousins, quotes Bobby Jones, Alexa Stirling, and then I discovered this paper article that Alexa herself wrote on her friendship with Bobby. I had seen it in 1990, in the 1990s. Sid Matthew has it in his big encyclopedia of Eastlake, but somehow I didn't get it. I didn't see the significance of it. This is the only eyewitness account of Bobby Jones's life that's ever been published. And Alexa shows wonderful writing skills here. When you read her prose, I bet you'll just coast along and not even knowing that you're struggling with the content. She's very frank about him, but you can tell she adores him and admires him. She saw him through his troubles at the beginning and his troubles at the end. So she's the only one that's ever written about that. How he did it, she was right there in the U.S. Open when he did it. He hit 2 balls in the water in the final round in 1921 in Washington and just about had his head blow off, but he contained himself. That was it. She said was the finest, worst score of his life, but the finest round of his life because it showed him getting control of himself on a golf course. This is her picture, where she lived with her family there, Dr. Stirling and Mrs. Stirling. He was a Scottish ophthalmologist, ENT doctor. She was a former opera singer. Alexa took up the violin 6 years before she held a golf club. And she was good enough. I'll show you some of her violin prowess. I like to see the two of them together because it emphasizes that age difference. This is 1908 when they met. She was a strong-looking 11-year-old, and he was a skinny, scrawny little 6-year-old. So that's the basis of their relationship, older woman, younger boy. My favorite picture of Alexa, just discovered thanks to Sid Matthew. Alexa's obituary, which is in the book, and Bobby's is too, and throughout the book, you'll see him mentioned for his regal presence. And a woman wrote about Alexa, said, when I was in her presence, if she looked at something, I felt like I should go fetch it for her. She had that sort of restrained elegance that made you pay attention. She didn't open her mouth very much, but when she did, people were impressed. This is from her father, from their faces, guess who won? This is Alexa on the right, having won the driving contest at the Southern Amateur in 1915 when she was 17, I think. When she won the U.S. Women's Amateur in 1916, she was lauded at Eastlake. This is an Art Deco invitation to a dinner given to Eastlake by Golf Canada, where the archive is. You want to have fun, go to an archive and look up what you're interested in and have people bring you boxes full of what you're interested in. That's the best feeling. During the war, she was an ambulance driver. Ambulance drivers had to qualify. We got her certificate, and what she did to do it, she had to show mechanical skills. Not only was she a great violinist, she was a great car mechanic and could do carpentry. Sandra, her 90-year-old daughter, says that the dining room table that she built for the family in northern Canada on their summer home still exists and is perfect. Not a nail in it, all tongue and groove. She also said, I hate to tell you this, but we just couldn't stand her violin practice. And she gave up the violin. But she didn't give up her golf. She won 8 straight Ottawa Golf Club women's championships. And she and her husband enjoyed golf, just as her parents had. She called that ambulance her war baby because she had to take so much time. She worked in the Great Fire of Atlanta in 1917, taking burned patients to hospital. This is the group called the Whiz Kids, where he exploded at Braeburn. From left to right, that's Perry Adair. He was, Bobby was 16. Perry was 18. Elaine, in the middle of them, was 20. And Alexa was 22 when they went on that trip. They raised $150,000. And you can see how attractive they were. When this picture appeared in the newspaper in Boston or Cleveland, people came out. This is a random article I found in Toronto of Alexa being a host at East Lake during the Metropolitan Opera. 2 of the men came out there for lunch and looked around and said, gosh, I sure would like to play this course. And I think she overheard them and said, if you don't mind playing with a woman, I'd be glad to take you out tomorrow. So they went out. She drove the first green, made a birdie on the second. At the third green, I think she had another birdie, and they said, she had introduced herself as Miss Stirling. One of the men said, you're not the U.S. Women's Amateur Champion Alexa Stirling by any chance? And she said a great thing. The New York writer, Yes, Y-E-hyphen-E-S, yes. I live right over there, the A-H. I had a worrisome conversation for me with Sandra over the phone. I said, Sandra, surely Alexa had a British accent. She had been in Atlanta, was born in Atlanta. They only had come like that year or year before. And then she moves to Eastlake, and they're very British. He was consul for the British government here. His wife from Yorkshire, England. Surely she had a British accent. I was pushing to try to make her more mysterious. Southerners love British accent. Sandra said, I'm sorry, Linton. She had a good old Southern accent. And so she did. I asked her about the violin. I said, surely she could sing. You must have had her singing to you. I'm sorry, Linton. As far as I know, she couldn't sing, which, you know, is interesting. But she can really play. Sid Matthew has just sent me these recitals. Last week, I emailed him. I want to talk about her music. What did she play? So he sent me the newspaper clippings. You can't see the top, but it's January 1916. This is the year she won her first, so in 6 months she'll be winning her first national women's golf tournament. Chant sans parole, hard to pronounce. Meditation in Thais, my wife's favorite violin piece ever. That's a coincidence because Thais was Bobby Jones's favorite opera. When she went to Ottawa, this shows that she did play the violin, even though Sandra said she did. It must have been after this that they made her stop. And this is in 1926. So this is just a year after she arrived as Mrs. Fraser. They got married at East Lake in 1925. Dr. Fraser said, I fell in love with this red-headed woman trying to get out of a sand trap. The impact of the book, I think, is on the legacy of Bobby Jones. Tom Cousins will tell you right up front that he was inspired by Bobby Jones, his behavior, as well as what he accomplished. And he wanted to honor him by making East Lake suitable for his name. That was one of his main motivations, and he's done it. And in the book, I compare the two men. There are some similarities. When Bobby Jones was going for the Grand Slam, nobody knew it. It just happened. When Tom Cousins was doing what he was doing at East Lake, you didn't see any billboards around like doctors, lawyers do, showing off with what he was going to do. It was all very quiet, piece by piece. The final years, I'm glad to see the Nyrick in the back, Nyrick Chenal, right there, came up to me before the talk and said, I was one of the boys who sat with Mr. Jones late in his life. Jack Schroeder and John Lambert are two college boys who have written. They did this chapter. All I had to do was ask them. They first asked me to write it, and that's one time I sat down with a computer to write a story. I could not type the first letter. Typing for somebody else on something like this would be impossible. So I said, Jack, you're a lawyer. Write it up. So he did. It was published in the Big Canoe Journal, and they gave me permission to put his words here. Jack told me things about Bobby Jones I never knew. Bobby Jones beat his illness with these college students. There he was, what you would think would be absolute misery. Totally with it mentally, but totally paralyzed. And yet Jack said, when I'd come in, Mr. Jones said, Jack, you don't look so good. How'd that date work out Thursday? How was that exam that you took? And by the way, what are you going to do anyway with your life and career? So all of a sudden, all of his misery melted away in the front of this man who could not move. They watched television together, they laughed and cried together. One of them saw the man come around the moon together on this little black and white TV. And I'll go back with you to the apartment because good friends of ours live in his apartment, Peachtree Andrews. That's where they saw him. He triumphed the second time because of problems that afflicted him. And that's the way he got away from it. They went in when no one else could go in. Jack Nicklaus was turned away. Arnold Palmer was turned away. But the boys came in. They were great relief to him. One thing about editing a book, a little digression here, says respis finem with an F. An editor picked up that I had actually typed respis venum with a V. And she picked up the phone and said, Linton, I looked that up. It means look to the wine instead of look to the end. I think we ought to change that the way it is. And sure enough, I looked back at the picture I took in Toronto Golf Club. This is the motto of that club. Look to the end. And it's true of life, but I haven't asked my friend who's a member, I said, you know, Jim, this is also true of golf. You can have a terrible, terrible day, and with bets being doubled, you stand on the 18th tee with all the money on the line now. You may have paid a little, but you've doubled it, and you got a hole in one. You're totally rescued by what happens on the last hole. That doesn't happen in tennis, you know. You get too far behind, you're going to lose. Many of you have been to Oakland Cemetery, and we've talked about that. Eddie over there did a special on Oakland Cemetery. And I've always often wondered, why are those golf balls there? Benjamin Franklin has pennies on his stone. I didn't mention when we had Bobby Jones's legacy up there that Benjamin Franklin is the only other American to win the honor of Freeman of St. Andrews. But Benjamin Franklin has pennies on his gravestone site in Philadelphia, which he wouldn't like. He wouldn't like people throwing away pennies. But I think Bobby Jones would enjoy the fact that golf balls are on his gravesite. When we were there, Charlie Harrison was speaking, and there was a group of about 30 people on a tour at Oakland, gathered around, and these four men dressed for golf came up at the end. And Charlie recognized them, and they said, we're so sorry to interrupt, but we're on the way to Alabama. Can we put some balls on the graves just for good luck? And I suddenly got it. That's where they come from. As you know, he's honored in Buckhead at the History Center. It's very nice to go in there and read it and see it and sit down and think about it. And also at the Atlanta Preservation Center in Grant Park, which everybody needs to go see. It's where he was born. His mother insisted that he be born in Atlanta because her firstborn died in Canton. And he was sickly, just like Alexa. Both of them were. There's another shot of the golf course all done, probably 2 years after that other one, again from another airplane. And a picture of the famous 18th hole. The 18th hole used to be the 9th when I was there as a member, up until just a few years ago. It was changed, reversed. And it's good that it was, because this is the hole Bobby and Alexa grew up on. And the very first golf course at East Lake, the Bendelow course, 1905, 1906, this was number 18. So it's exactly the same land as they played on. I had in my first draft of my story on this hole that this is probably where American Indians played golf. But of course, I finally dropped that. It's important because last September, this book is the first book to have Tiger's return, his comeback. And it happened at a place that is the quintessential American comeback place. East Lake was going to be lost. Tom Cousins heard it was going to be an automobile junkyard. And that's when he made his move and got it. He didn't really know, he told me, exactly what he was going to do with it. But he'd grown up there, like Bobby Jones, and just couldn't stand it. So he bought it. So comeback on comeback. Bobby Jones came back from his temper. Tiger, because of all his surgery, couldn't run. Roy McIlroy ran away from the crowd, but he couldn't, so he was there with them. And some older men said, you know, this is an interesting moment. The only other time I remember anything like this happening was in 1927, some old man said, when Bobby Jones won the British Open. The question is, why did they go so nuts? And the answer is, I haven't told you, but 6 years before, in 1921, this is the place where he picked up his ball in the middle of a tournament, stormed off the course. The press just vilified him. He couldn't get out of a bunker, and he just went nuts. He was so beautiful and so attractive and so courteous that his explosions were so shocking. So these are the same people that saw him do that, saw him crash hard. People like me who were there 6 years ago to see this wonder kid from America. And now here he comes again, looking even better, having beaten that problem and winning in the same place, on the most famous golf course in the world. So that's the reason for that huge crowd. That's also the end of my talk. So I want to thank you again for coming out. I'm ready to answer all your questions. Thank you very much.
You didn't mention his wife.
Oh, no, I did not mention Mary Jones.
And what was his affliction at the end of his life that you mentioned?
What was his what?
Affliction.
Oh, I didn't mention that. He had a rare disease known only to neurologists and neurosurgeons. It's a disease that affects the spinal cord, which is about the size of the finger. Carries all the traffic, millions of roads of nerve impulses from the brain to the body. And in syringomyelia, that not hard, but brain substance, spinal cord, turns into a straw. It dies from within. Cavity. Today, a neurosurgeon can go in with a little shunt and drain off that fluid. I've had patients that stopped getting worse. But then, there was no MRI to even be sure to see the cavity like we can today. And he did have some disc disease. So the doctors fixed that, and he got even worse. So by the time Jack and what they call these college students, they call them the Jones boys, got to meet him, he'd come home from Emory with another failed operation, even worse, got worse. Went to Boston, got worse. Everything just got worse. So it had the pace and the chronicity of syringomyelia, not disc disease.
So that's the name of it. Syrinx in Greek means cavity. Myelia means the spinal cord in neurology. Mrs. Jones, according to the young men, I don't know whether you found out, was it Mrs. Jones' idea or Bobby Jones's idea to get college kids? Do you know? Well, it makes my story better to say that he thought of it. I can imagine him in his little room. His friends couldn't come see him. I can just imagine him saying, Mary, I need to see some college students. He had such a mind. They caught him, Jack said one time, oh, you caught me reading my favorite book. And he was reading a dictionary. Jack, who was inspired to give speeches by Bobby Jones and to write by Bobby Jones, was told things about how to do them, and it's in the book. It's an astonishing experience, but I like to say it was his idea to get you, because then he could concentrate on you. Everybody that did it got used to seeing him, so they weren't repelled by his body, which most people were. But the college students just went right in, told about their trouble. John, I know, went in one day and they're all excited. And Mr. Jones said, John, you look so great. What in the world is going on? I guess I am happy. You know what happens at homecoming at Tech, you remember? And he went on and on with the story. And Jones was so excited he had to go see it. John said it was the last time he left his apartment. And he laughed his head off. His wife, Mary, said every time he thought about it, he laughed. And the doctors said, maybe to you, but to others, you kept him alive for at least 3 or 4 years when he would have given up and died. So not only did he inspire all of you, you inspired him. You made his brain healthy instead of miserable and depressed. And he used you to treat his own misery. Powerful. It's a powerful lesson, I think, for all of us. Any other questions? Well, once again, I'm very grateful for you coming. Yes.
I hate to bring this up, but there was a piece like before Tom Cousins, before Bobby Jones, east of 2nd Avenue. It's still there. It surrounds Meadowbrook. And did you ever know Paul Grigsby?
Did I know Paul Grigsby?
Yes.
Yes, I did. I tell you about him. What was the other part of your question? Meadowbrook?
Yes, Meadowbrook. There was a, so the problems with East Lake before Mr. Cousins was part of the fact that the whole dark area was redlined. Nobody could get a mortgage for anything because Gordon lived at Meadowbrook.
Nobody could move in there. Nobody could get a mortgage because the neighborhood was so bad.
Because the federal government and the banks simply decided that it was too bad to be lived in. And so whatever it was allowed to go down, and the city never really finished East Lake Meadows, and they never bothered to repair anything, because we lived there. Gordon would walk the streets. It's at East Lake, east of 2nd Avenue. The split was 2nd Avenue, there. It used to be Fayetteville Road.
Right. Well, the resentment that was felt by the black community there was, I could use the word enormous, but it was beyond that because they felt cheated by somebody said they even came and took out all our dirt. They scraped up all the topsoil. So it was a bad story. Tom's commitment, I think, showed them, however, that they were going to make it right. It's described in the book, but Charlie Harrison told me a lot of that story. He lives in Meadownook, which was the first house
there, and I think the second oldest in Atlanta, which is Spire, was spared by the fire and Civil War. Any other questions? Well, you're a friendly group of faces to stand up in front of, and I'm grateful to you. Thank you.
Frank Tanger and I met you at Eastlake and interviewed you, and you talked about joining. I was membership for Paul Grigsby when
I came and gave you a check.
you did. And then I also actually interviewed your son as well. He came to my house in Linton. He was there for a couple of years.
He had to be. I got to get your.
Yeah, I'll give it to you in a minute, but go ahead and take care of it.
I got to tell you, get your information.
No, I will.
We have a,
Jim Van Deeren. I just wanted to say I remember you. How much I enjoyed the talk, and looking back